That was a very loud clearing of my throat here. And Jackie, you're going to need to mute there. Hi there, everybody. Welcome back to the Philanthropy Mastermind series. If you see that I'm getting my sea legs again, it's because I'm actually off the sea. I'm really happy to welcome you back. As you may know, if you're not new to this series, I've been gone across the Pacific for a little bit, and very happy to rejoin all my friends in the Philanthropy Mastermind series, brought to you by DonorSearch, our friends in hosting this series since 2016. We've had now over 500 programs with about 275 or so colleagues, guests, presenters, call them what you will, but people who are willing to generously share their time with us. And today we have, of course, Melody Song. She'll be appearing visually with us in just a second. In fact, here she comes. I can see her face right now. Thank you so much, Melody, for being here. I'm going to introduce you now in just a second, but I also want to welcome everybody here. You saw that we were going muted there for a moment as we were testing our new sound, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you. So we have a couple ways, as you saw on those slides, for you to interact in today's conversation. We want it to be a conversation with you. Those are to, of course, use the chat, which is right there at the bottom of your screen typically, and we would love it if you would take an opportunity to just say hi and maybe tell us where you're from. That'll be very important to our guest today, Melody Song, who herself is coming in from Germany. So it's going to be a nice global portrait of this conversation today, and we want to make sure we know where you are so we can weave that into the discussion. Additionally, we have the Q&A, which of course is for questions and answers. So please do post your questions there, and we'll make sure to discuss those either throughout or at least at the towards the end of our discussion today. Once again, this, as with all of the rest of the sessions in our series, are recorded. So with Melody's permission, we'll be recording this one and posting it to the library over at DonorSearch, which is at donorsearch.net, where you can find hundreds of sessions like this one there for you. But don't leave, because this is your chance to actually be a part of the conversation. So with that, Melody, thank you so much for making time late in the day to hang out and talk about Philanthropic NomadLand.
Thank you, Jay, for having me here. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here today. It is quite late, but we still have light. It's 9:30 at night in Berlin right now.
And it's still light out there?
Yeah, there's still light out there, so that's great.
And you're in Berlin, correct?
Yes, correct. However, okay. I'm not a Berliner. Like I don't speak German. I moved to Berlin only about 3 years ago, having most of my fundraising career in Canada.
Yes, and I was going to give a bio of you, but it would be really reductive. You have this extraordinary story. Do you mind if I ask you to tell us a little bit about that to begin? Your origin story.
Yeah, for sure. So I myself was born and raised in Beijing, and I say communist China, and until I was 21, and I went to Canada for studying, and got my university degree, master degree, and then kind of stayed in Canada for 22 years. So I am a naturalized Canadian citizen, and right about the time I felt completely comfortable in Canada, and had also been fundraiser for over close to 20 years now. and yeah, and then we decided to move to Germany and completely, offset myself, like start over again. And yeah, so my husband's German, my son is Canadian, German, Chinese. We're a very international family, currently living in Berlin. I think we lost. Yeah.
I know we can dig into the oh, do you have us now? I think we had a little bit of an interruption there, but and we hopefully everybody here will be give us a little grace if we have some internet disruption as we're having communication today. But Melody, I know that it's a very different environment for fundraising in each of these places we talked about, and we haven't even talked much between ourselves about that environment in Beijing, which would be fascinating to talk about too, because fundraising has exploded in China in the last couple of decades. But it's very different to the world of Canada, and Canada is very different to the experience in Germany. So I know we're going to talk about a lot of things, but do you mind doing a quick comparison maybe of those three places? Because those are all places you know very well.
Yes, for sure. And America as well. Canada is also different from America, where we have a stricter privacy rule, but not as strict as Germany and the European Union, the UK, where we have the GDPR, that you can't even keep lists, like people have to opt in, and people who doesn't opt in, you can't even keep that list. So it's from that point of view, from like donor information access point of view, these places are all completely obviously different. US is the easiest accessible place for donor information. Everywhere else, I think it's extremely difficult. China is interesting because China only have charity law in place in 2016. So philanthropy is very, very new. Well, it's obviously old philanthropy, but after communism, where we all have the same thing or nothing at the same time. It's the personal wealth, private wealth, like wasn't established until late 1990s, 2000, say. Like people just start to own cars in 2001 in China. So that's why like philanthropy is so kind of new in the modern Chinese society, and the government is putting lots of regulations on there. For example, there are only 10 platforms in China that is allowed to raise online fundings. Really? You can't just be any, like you can't just say, oh, I'm going to start a platform so that we can, like the giving platform that we have so many here in the US. In China, there are only 10 official platforms where you can raise money. And it has to be approved by the government. Government controls top in China. So most charities are also government owned. A lot of the money are channeled through government. Yeah, but private philanthropy is becoming more, like more common. We're seeing major gifts in China as well to, for example, private schools, and a lot of these high net worth people also form this diaspora community in Canada and US, which people are very, very interested now to, kind of explore into and, get philanthropic givings from the diaspora community that is really closely connected with the Chinese high net worth community. Yeah, so those are kind of the difference. In Germany, obviously, we have really bad digitalization. When I first came to Germany, my first client didn't have a donate button on the website. So if you're a donor in Germany, you have to call your bank and arrange a kind of like a bank transfer to the organization that you donate to. And when they receive it, they don't even know who it is. It's just a bank number. So you as a donor have to call the organization to tell them that I've donated to you. So you as a donor has lots of jobs to do. Like the experience of donors was terrible. Like there's so many barriers for them to think, okay, maybe I shouldn't. They weren't thanked. There's no database. So that was just beginning of the pandemic. And during the pandemic, everybody was like, oh my God, we need to grow individual giving because 80% of our money come from government and the EU, and now they all changed their mind. Everybody goes to help pandemic, health, and other organizations were left in cold. So they're just starting to becoming more digitalized, as well as potential from individuals, exploring that a little bit more.
There's a lot to unpack in there, not the least of which is that in each of these settings, and not just legally, but maybe culturally as well, that there's this idea about what is the role of government, and whether or not certain things should be supported or not. And so I don't know what it's like in Germany today, but in Canada, you have national health care. I believe there is national health care.
Yeah.
Obviously, in Germany, there is not in the United States. That kind of setting makes it both essential, but also possible for us to raise money for hospitals. And that's just one example. And then you also have this whole thing you alluded to. If people weren't buying lots of automobiles, well, that's also because there wasn't a lot of wealth aggregation in China. And once people could amass personal wealth, then they were in a position to give if the government made it possible. And there were platforms that were legal to accept gifts. So there's so much in all of that. And I wonder, as you have kind of navigated that road from very different place to different place, how you kind of wrapped your head around that and then talked about it with people so that both they can operate successfully where they are, but also have kind of a bigger view than just what's right in front of their face.
Yeah, so it has to be related to my experience as a fundraiser. I was a fundraiser for the Calgary Zoo for close to 7 years, and I was a senior development officer, where we actually were at the time getting to a pair of pandas. As you know, like if Chinese government using the panda diplomacy to get other countries close, and you in the States you have quite a lot, like the Smithsonian has one. Memphis just lost theirs, Memphis just, one of the panda died, and the other one got sent to back to China. It did make the news, and everyone's saying, "Oh my God, like what are they feeding the pandas?" Anyways, San Diego has a pair, so you've got lots of pandas, and each of these pairs costs a lot of money. We're talking about 1 million per year in renting fee to China, which is a conservation fee to build like reserves in China. And we're talking about panda enclosure that is either completely built new or retrofit from older enclosures, and that costed our zoo over $25 million dollars to retrofit our old elephant habitat and to the standards of the Chinese. And all of this, like no government is paying anything. The zoo is paying for it themselves, right? So you do need to raise money. So that's where because I was in that project and I came from China originally, so I got involved into, how can we do some cross-border philanthropy and engage some Chinese, either diaspora community locally in Canada, or can we tackle into some Chinese philanthropists in China where they're already supporting panda conservation? And panda is such an umbrella species where, you support the panda doesn't mean that, this money goes to just one species. Because of this reserve is at the most, the highest biodiversity area in China, you're protecting everything else that is not charismatic, that is also extinct, like close to extinction, that is, thousands of species. So it's very worthwhile. So I was able to, so I went to China every year with the president of the zoo, and we kind of, we approached local philanthropists, or we were introduced to local philanthropists, having a good relationship with the government, with the consulate, with the, China-Canada Business Council. We go to their events, we golf with the Chinese Entrepreneur Club that is owned by Jack Ma. And yeah, so, do all these things, then we were able to raise quite a lot of money from, we had a philanthropist from Vancouver giving us a major gift, someone from Calgary, a local philanthropist, but Chinese, two from Calgary. And we'll also be able to engage a major philanthropist in China as well, and a businessman who built a social business for us, transporting bamboo from Chengdu to Calgary, as well as a corporate gift from Hainan Airline that is valued about 1 million Canadian dollars a year to kind of travel, transport the bamboo. So that experience helped me to understand the intricacy of everything.
Right, because there you were sitting, I mean, you understood what it was like back in, Beijing or these other places in China, I know to a certain degree, but you didn't necessarily have a relationship with Jack Ma when you were doing this.
No.
This was all something you developed. And then you knew the local environment plus their needs. What did they need financially and so forth? But they didn't necessarily know this market that you knew, I guess, as a person growing up there. So you had to bring all these pieces together. I want to ask you something that may relate to the thing that is a big theme of what we're going to talk about today with Philanthropic NomadLand, which is when you're in that role, and I've had other good friends and family members who have been in a role where they were able to speak authentically from their own experience because they grew up in a place about their work. But then sometimes people would only turn to them about that thing. So in other words, I'm sure that when you were in that role, you had so much value to the zoo as a whole. But did you occasionally find yourself in a position where people were looking to you as kind of like the China hand, which is a phrase we used to use in DC? So they were only asking you China-related things instead of just, your whole brain as you thought about development? That's
exactly it, like a little bit of a tokenism, kind of that I definitely have experienced. And what what is very inspiring for me is that I met this Aboriginal leader in Canada. His name is Thomas Snow. He's like a the Sioux Nation in Banff, Canada. He said when he was Aboriginal child in school, everyone looked at him. The teacher said something about Aboriginal culture in Canada. Everybody looked at him, like, you talk about the culture. And he hated that. He was like, no, I don't want to be seen as a token. I am, I'm not just, my culture or whatever. And he didn't like public speaking and everything. But now I think when he spoke to us in Banff, he's the adjunct professor, Indigenous Culture Studies professor with Mount Royal University. And he told us that he regretted it. He said, like, having your culture and being able to speak about your culture is such a privilege. Understanding that it is a privilege to actually talk about your culture and educate, and it cultivates that empathy that helps eliminate intolerance or any ignorance or anything else. So so after that, I was thinking, although sometimes we don't like it, it's that discomfort, right? Like we talk about discomfort in diversity and inclusion. We talk about discomfort of people hearing about racism or thinking they have, bias, they have unconscious bias, they feel uncomfortable. It's the other way around as well. Like, as a people of color, as someone who is, come from another culture or the minority culture, we also feel uncomfortable. We feel uncomfortable talking about our differences because we don't want to. We want to be just like everybody else. We want to be fitting in. But after that talk, I kind of feel like, hey, like, let's get uncomfortable. Let's talk about our differences. Let's use every opportunity possible to educate, to help people understand.
We had a comment in the chat while you were talking, just saying, but surely the skills of handling various languages helps informing relationships. And I didn't hear anything in what you said that went counter to that. Clearly, in each of these environments, you've been able to speak from knowledge that also incorporated your language skills. So having that ability is and can be important, but that's different from being able to speak for an entire group of people, I guess, is one of the issues.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I was the diversity chair for the AFP Calgary chapter, and back then, and I felt at the time when people say diversity, or a board meeting, they would look at me. It's like, hey, Melody, you take care of diversity. Diversity is taken care of, like this is a diverse person taking care of diversity. Great. But that's not what it is about, right? Like it is not about one person doing a job. Or in an organization setting, maybe the HR department, people look at HR department, hey, the HR department, you should come up with a policy about diversity, and then we can, check mark.
Then we're done with it.
Then we're done with it. Yeah, but the problem is, no, we're not done with it. There's just so much to it. Involves so many, you decided to hire someone who's different, but you have to deal with that discomfort of dealing with some differences. This person comes with a different perspective. This person is not going to look like you or act like you. Or, people tend to hire people that look like them and act like them. It's the same as Chinese people. Chinese people tend to hire other Chinese people, right? So,
right.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons I love talking with you about this, is because you have taken this conversation and you've taken it in different places. And so you're seeing all of it in all of its dimensions, both personally, but also professionally, like what happens to all the people in an environment. And there's a tendency in North America, I think, do correct me, I know you will, if I'm really wrong about this, to look across the Pacific or even across the Atlantic and then lump people together. So whether it's China, which is a highly diverse place, I mean, and including linguistically, but you could say the same thing about Germany. I mean, maybe a little less so because the population's smaller, but you have diversity in many different places in many different forms. But sometimes a distance seems to give us the ability to, or this false ability to say, well, it must all be like X because it's over there and therefore it's all the same. And that's not at all true. But giving that explanation and helping people to have a broader and deeper understanding is hard, especially if you're the only voice speaking about it. That's, I think, when I first met you and had an opportunity to hear from you as you were speaking out there in Banff. And I'm curious to know more about how you have personally evolved in your own thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion in not only its forms, but also in its abbreviations, and how you're discussing that now in each of these environments. I mean, starting with Canada, but then today in Germany as well. What diversity means to you, how you define it for others as they're kind of making this very clumsy journey to try and figure things out.
Yeah, so what you talked about, this whole lumped into a category, at first I laugh at this people of color category. Like identify yourself, like Caucasian people of color, like it's just very, short. And then we have the AAPI, which is the Asian, Pacific, like Pacific Islander. And that's also, we feel from the AAPI group, we feel that is very generalizing because we're talking about from like Japan, Korea, China. There's like, this is huge language differences there with Pacific Islanders. I mean, like we're talking about like Indonesia, like different religion. Yeah, like Singapore, like completely different things. However, that aside, I have to give a shout out to the API affinity group in AFP. If you are Asian fundraiser, you should look into joining this group. And there's a LinkedIn group, I think, and also they meet quite like often as well. And every time I meet with them, there's one person saying, like, most of them in America, most of them in the US, there'll be one or two or all of us saying, "Oh, we're so alone in our like we don't look like the people we fundraise from. We don't look like our team. We feel alone, despite that." I think I identify kind of more with Chinese mainland culture because I was born and raised. But there are people in America and Canada who are born and raised in Canada, but they're kind of dealing with this dual identity and not feeling fitting in either places. So that difficulty, I can see that struggle. Despite that we're lumping, for example, the API group fundraisers, but there's so little of us. There's so even we're lumping, even though we're lumping people, and people still like they're struggling. And now I have a son. Right, my son is born in Canada, and now living in Germany, and he also looked Asian. He looked more like me than his father. He's half German, but I just don't want him to feel that, you know, I have this fear that he will grow up feeling out of place. He will grow up feeling not belonging to either culture or any of the three cultures that he's actually dealing with right now. And so I think, so for me, I just, that's why, from my experience, why do I want to speak up about this? Why do I want to dedicate myself into this? Is because I want, you know, to change the situation for him, for the next generation, because obviously we're the first generation, and then second generation is coming up.
We're putting in the chat, actually, Jack, that while we don't have a link immediately for the AFP group, we'll look for that, and you can see Melody's post on community right there. So I hope you'll look for that. And before we go too much farther, Melody, if people want to learn more about your work in general, I usually do this, but I want to make sure I give it prominence here too, because you're doing so much. You're speaking in conferences and so forth. We'll talk about your conversation, your keynote in just a few minutes in Germany. But if people want to learn more about your work and follow some of your writing, where's the best place to do that?
I have most of my blogs on my website, which is dogoodhere.org. So do good here as one word, .org. So that is the website where there's a blog. There are still not that many, and I'm still like kind of trying to grab the stuff that I've written over the years into that one place.
Sure.
But if you want to look at some of my work, especially on diversity and inclusion, you can look there.
Now, we have started going into this whole conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the things that we talked about before beginning today is this whole idea about leading from, and you talked about this at the conference, leading from not,
where you are,
who you are, as opposed to
leading from who
what
you
are.
are.
Yes. So can you talk about that a bit? Maybe even talking about the conference, and then define that a bit and describe what you were trying to communicate there and why it's important.
Yeah. So about a couple of months, a month ago, I was invited to give a keynote speech at the Leadership Summit for the German Fundraising Congress. And I was like completely dumbfounded, or confused, or like shocked that they invited me, because first of all, I'm not German. You know, I'm a Chinese Canadian who does not speak German. and second of all, I feel like I'm not a leader. Like I wouldn't be that leader choice, you know, like I'm not a director. I'm not, you know, I do not occupy a leadership position, you know, like, so I kind of felt like, hey, you know, why me? And then I felt that I got the point. You know, they want someone who's not a leader to talk about leadership, and I later confirmed that with there's a group called Leaders of Tomorrow. I don't know if you have heard about them. From the U.S., from Canada, Tony Myers, from the U.S., Kay Sprinkle Grace are involved with this group, and they're doing lots of really good work in Eastern Europe, as well as here in Germany too, we have Jan Uckermann, we have Miriam Long, who are doing the work here in Germany, and they want to show people that, you know, you could lead from anywhere in the organization, and that's why they kind of think, hey, maybe Melody is a fit. So I started the keynote as, you know, talking about imposter syndromes, which is really, you know, I felt completely out of place. You know, if you look at the definition of imposter syndrome is that you look around and there's no one like you and act like you, whatever. And but why am I giving this talk to the leaders in Germany? And that goes back to where, you know, I was talking about this indigenous leader who said, you know, take the advantage of every single opportunity to talk about your cultural heritage, to talk about your perspective, speak up. And so I just said, yes, happy to do it. And that's why I started with imposter syndrome. I started with, you know, leaders kind of like imposters. You know, some people are comfortable with it, totally, like natural born. But a lot of us are not comfortable. A lot of us, whatever reason, you know, we might not be comfortable being a leader. We might, for me, it's more kind of cultural background. You know, my cultural background being Chinese, we're taught to be conform, like we're taught to conform, we're taught to fit in. Also being an immigrant for so many years, I was so used to fitting in. I was so used to, you know, minimize our differences and trying to be the same as everybody else. And yeah, so it's not very comfortable as well for me. And yeah, so this whole imposter syndrome, and I talked about a couple of leaders that inspired me, and one of them is Thomas Snow, who's indigenous, and one of them is Margaret Lee, who's the director of UX design from Google. And she wrote an article about, it's called Insights from a Reluctant Leader. She talked about how she felt so reluctant to be a leader because her culture just were like, you know, basically we're not teaching her, like teaching him to be humble, to go with the flow, to respect authorities. And none of these spells out leadership. You know, like we think about leadership, you know, we think about people who are visionary, who are kind of like very brave, you know, they take all the risks, and they, you know, like we're not that kind of people. Like the Chinese culture, at least, are not teaching us to be that kind of people. So we kind of, you know, feel like, you know, do we want to check in ourselves at the door and be someone else when we, you know, be at, you know, at our work, basically, you know? So that is kind of a continuous imposter syndrome. And so she talked about the code switch, where, you know, you code switch all the time. And the majority culture, if you are in the majority culture, you might not actually notice this kind of code switch that's been going on. But as the minority, we are often doing this a lot and making a lot of efforts of doing that. And so try to fit in. And she talked about the cultural fit versus cultural add, as in, when we hire someone, you know, do we want to find to get a better team dynamic? You know, do we want just like, hey, let's work with our friends, you know, who look like us, think like us? Isn't that great? Which is great, you know, you're but at the same time, do you want to, is that what you want? Or do you want to grow? Do you want to diversify your culture? Do you want to diversify your capabilities? And to have that cultural add mentality is actually a little bit more difficult to implement than the cultural fit, because we as person naturally would gravitate towards people who look like us, who think like us, you know. So it takes some efforts, but what she meant is that we do need to take that effort and realize that we need to you know, being more inclusive and accepting people as they are, and allowing them to be themselves at workplace, not trying to, you know, have them fit in or that kind of thing. Yeah, so that's what I talked about at the keynote last week.
As you talked about this, it really strikes me that, again, they reached out to you, presumably to deliver this keynote. You said that, you weren't sure really why it was you, it's the imposter syndrome in you. And this is something I've heard about a lot in the course of this series, people talking about this, which I suppose means that we must be fortunate in inviting some great people, because that seems to be a universal, that with the leaders of tomorrow, I've heard this sentiment echoed by others like yourself, that they weren't really sure. But then doesn't that also mean that the rising generation of leaders, however we define leadership, that they don't look, sound, feel, and have the same experience as the people who came before, which means that that's almost the definition of diversity. So how can we, the communities within themselves, like AAPI, within AFP, they can only do so much, or AADO, or all these other things that we know, can only do so much in and of themselves to create an environment where we get to hear from people like you at a conference as a keynote. What is it that others can do from the generation that's kind of come before, so they can make a concerted effort to have the leaders of tomorrow setting the tone for the conversation, not just being in the room, not just being a part of an affinity group, all of which are great, but actually determining the course of action, who will be there, what we will do, what we will say. What kind of responsibility do the major organizations have, and what can and should they be doing to ensure that the leaders of tomorrow are setting the goals and the pace?
So the leaders that we thought before, the visionary, the typical leaders that we think about, I think those we require different type of leaders if we want to create this kind of inclusive organization. The skill set, I think, will be very different, and also the conditions that the leader set in the organization should be also very different. So, for example, talking about German culture, I think one of the biggest German problem is the judgment. Like, Germans judge everybody. Like, there's lots of judgment on things. Like, oh, why are you walking on this side of the line? But there's nobody there, like so it's, and also, like, why aren't people not talking German? Like, Germans tend to do that. I didn't say that obviously in the conference, but
we won't tell anybody.
Yeah, but there's also other things that related to this, as in, for example, if there's a movie that you don't understand. I think Margaret Lee used the movie Bao. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's a short anime that got an Oscar, and so it's called Bao, and then it's basically the mother, ate the child in the Bao. So when you don't understand, so there's lots of people say, I don't understand this. This is so confusing. When you don't understand, I think the mindset needs to change from like judgment or confusion to curiosity, as in, like, how can we trump judgment? As in, like, we see someone, oh, he's got smelly lunch or whatever. It becomes a stereotype. It reinforces that stereotype.
Right. Instead
of that, ask, what is this? Is this a normal food for you in this culture? So use that skill of being curious. Use that skill of saying, instead of judgment and confusion, oh, we don't. So I think Germans need a lot of that. So I talked a little bit about that curiosity instead of judgment, and and I think that skill is very, very important. Also about, when you say you do problem solving at work, in an organization where you propose some idea, and a lot of people, especially in nonprofit, I hear a lot of no's. The naysayers, as in, no, we don't have budget, no, we don't have this and that. instead of that, saying something, what if we can do this? What if we do this, then what happens? Use that curiosity. So that's one of the key skills that I think is really important. And the other one is learning instead of knowing. So when we, in organizations, a classic example is the fight between finance and fundraisers. In every client that I work with, there's a fight between finance and fundraisers. Fundraiser says, oh, we raised this much money. And the finance said, no, you didn't, because of this and that, or whatever. We don't understand this, like you need to fill this form out, blah, blah. And they never talk the language. This is where the silo comes from, right? Like they never talk the same language. But if we, in a meeting, just change that mindset from knowing, hey, I know this, I'm the expert, to learning, as in like, I'm learning here, just claim, set the mindset from the beginning. I'm here to learn. And that immediately will change the tone. That immediately will change that meeting from a fight to, like, hey, let's collaborate and let's do something. So I think that, so those kind of skills, I think is more in demand now for a different type of leadership.
And I know another couple of areas that you work in and have worked in are design thinking and also everything to do with data. One of the things you're involved in is not just this world of fundraising, as in asking people for money, which you do, but also the world of APRA, which is figuring out where the money is and also what people's interests and levers are for change. Where does all that fit now in the work? And how important is it that we embrace that kind of rational mind and look at the data in order to also have that beginner's mind? So we're leading with curiosity, with learning in mind, instead of just, absolutism and judgment.
Yeah, so really it's all about insights, right? Like it's all about having the insights and collecting the insights. And from APRA, we already have a database where we can collect the insights from. So this, I think, is all related to, again, the new type of leadership where we're looking at uncertainties and ambiguities. And we cannot rely on our knowledge anymore. That's from the past. We need to always collect insights, like almost on a daily basis. So one of the things in design thinking, I'm a lecturer as well in design thinking for the Berlin International University. I asked my student to go out there and then just, find insights every day, like train your mind to do that, as in insights come from anywhere. So you probably, so one of the students would say something like, oh, today I noticed that the lights are really short in Berlin. Like the pedestrian, there's a big street. The pedestrian is walking in the middle of it, and the light changed, and everyone's like, so it almost feel like it's made for the cars, not for the pedestrian. So that kind of thing. I need them to be observant, to collect that kind of insight, so that can inform us in many different ways. Like, how can we make innovations? How can we move forwards? So data collection, data-driven decisions are very important for this kind of uncertainty. And also, insights come from the team. A lot of the time, we don't have, if you ask a team, how are things, how do you do things in this organization? They'll tell, oh, you fill out this form and da. But then you ask them again, like, how do you really do it? Then things start coming out, like, oh, you really have to talk to this person or whatever. Like, there's a whole different, operation model that's being in people's mind, or the whole different kinds of, like, different team members have different ideas about donors, knowledge about donors, knowledge about potential donors. You just need to, with design thinking, we can actually bring them together. We do a session called stakeholder mapping, where we could, get people from diverse departments, program people. We don't just ask the fundraisers, we ask different people, and then ask them to brainstorm and put it all on the board so we can all see it. So kind of virtual, like, visualize that mental model so that we can all see, oh, where's the barrier and where are the people that we haven't got to, So these are all very, collecting insights is just very important.
One of the things I tried to always probe about in all these sessions is when we ask people to do something that they're not currently doing, whether it's hiring a more diverse workforce in a meaningful way, whether it's utilizing design thinking to reimagine the work. All these things take time, and but we believe that they're important intrinsically. And most of us believe that they're important, but we have to ultimately go and talk to somebody, like you said, the difference between the finance office and the fundraising office, and make a case for it. So when you wrap all this together, all these different ideas we've been discussing, especially where they involve diversity and equity and inclusion, what is the ultimate financial argument that you make that helps act as a buttress for all these things we know we need to do, but often people just talk about, but they actually don't practice? How do you tell them, no, do this, and we actually do more good?
Yeah, that's for database, for example, an argument for insight collecting and having like a process that everyone agreed on and destroying the silo. Most of the organizations I work for, that was where the problem came out of. So there'll be kind of like, oh, half of our team are using Razor's Edge and half of our team are not. Therefore, we don't know where that 10 million went, right? Like these are huge international organizations we're talking about, and they're missing 10 million, like that's a financial argument for sure. Right. Why are you missing this? Why it takes 3 days for your ED or, for your director to see like how much money you raised yesterday? And this should not take 3 days from efforts from all departments. It should just easily be real time. And you have the tool to use it. A lot of the times people have the tool, they just don't know. They didn't know that they have the tool. And all these things that you think it would take time, like the database and the design thinking sessions, if you do have the commitment, it does not take time at all because the knowledge resides in people's heads and the data is in the database, or the database is there. You need to put the data in the database. So it just takes it just takes to use it or to actually get together and do it. And I'm seeing more clients are more open. I have not met anybody who said, no, we don't want to do a session. If they hired us or if they hired me to do it, this is the methodology I proposed. Otherwise, they wouldn't hire me. So obviously, there's also the argument of donors being very diverse as well. Mm-hmm. And I really don't like to say donors are becoming more diverse, and donors always been diverse. It's just, we're not seeing them. I used to work for Orbis International in Canada, and I used to go visit donors in Vancouver and meet with donors, the Chinese donors who just quietly give 5,000 every year, 5,000. This is just, we're talking about someone who's selling food in the food court. And it's amazing how these donors just exist. They give so that Orbis, who does these hospitals around the world, they fly a FedEx plane. They provide this eye surgery to people in China, and you don't know the money. You don't this money go help internationally, but that doesn't mean that we don't have philanthropic donors in North America, in Canada, or in US. They're very, very philanthropic, but they're more tend to support things at home, for example, a little bit more. So it's just, hiring that diverse person would just really help you to see them better and to engage with them better.
Thank you for all of this, Melody.
Mm-hmm.
Really do appreciate it, especially so late in the day out there. And once again, if people want to learn more about your work, can you tell us where, once again, they can go and look up your website address and learn more about your consultancy?
Definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. That would be really good. And also my website is dogoodhere.org, dogoodhere, one word.org. I'm also actually starting a new role with the European Union Innovation Institute as their fundraising orchestrator for the Climate Kick, which is the climate knowledge and insights community.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it would be really exciting to be involved in really a cause that I really believe in. So,
well, we'll look forward to hearing more about that, and hopefully hearing some of your speeches somewhere when they're not in Germany, unless they're recorded. Was that recorded, by the way?
I don't think so, unfortunately, not.
Okay,
and
we'll
the feedbacks were amazing, because I thought the Germans would be not open, but they would feel a little bit but they come to me with all sort of, one woman said, I'm like, I'm not a fundraiser, but I'm not the head of fundraising in my organization. I feel so out of place. And another man was like, I'm the top person in the company and I'm Romanian, and people have higher standard for Romanian because my German is not good. So it's just, it resonates with everybody. So it's interesting.
And by the way, we had a couple of questions toward the end that relate to tackling hunger and food insecurity. So I think what I'll do is, since I've already said said our goodbyes, is to forward them to you so you can try and address those. But I hope you'll also reach out to her both through LinkedIn, as she just said, but also through her website, and follow her work. It's really, really extraordinary and a great example to us who are often working in little micro environments without that broad view of the world. So it's inspiring to hear about all this from you directly, Melody. And thank you so much for taking time to do it. We really appreciate it.
Thank you again for having me here. It's really great to be here.
And please do join us on Thursday. We have Cannon joining us once again, Cannon Brook, who will be talking with us. And of course, we have sessions throughout the rest of the year. So please do check them out, all at DonorSearch.net, where you can also see recording this session right there. And you can also hear episodes from our podcast. So that'll be a lot of fun. Check all that out once again at DonorSearch.net. So until next time, take care. Thanks, Melody.
Thank you. Bye.